What miracle were they looking for? They saw dangerous dimensions of God. But at the slightest opportunity, they bowed to Baal. They committed adultery with Ashtaroth. What injustice have your fathers found in me? It's not that God is a sadist. It's not that God just likes to punish his people. Remember what led to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? Do you remember the conversation between God and Abraham? He said the iniquity. Do you remember? He said that iniquity has come up to me. So every morning that they woke up in Sodom and Gomorrah, what they used to register their existence in the courts of God was iniquity. So every time the courts of heaven looked upon Sodom and Gomorrah, the feedback from the earth was what? Iniquity. And in the engagement between Lot and the angels that came to his door, we see a taste of that iniquity. Sodomy, homosexuality. Men living the natural use of women are now beginning to have sexual intercourse with themselves. That was the stench coming out of the city of Sodom. Now, if God will not tolerate such iniquity from within a city that is not Zion, he will not tolerate it from a city that is Zion. Because God, the Bible says his scepter is not a scepter of love. His scepter is a scepter of what? Righteousness, justice. If he did not make excuses for Sodom and Gomorrah and say, oh, they are just learning, let's leave them. The stench had become too much. God had to send angels to destroy the city. If he did not condone it for Sodom and Gomorrah, he can't condone it for Zion, for Jerusalem. He can't. He said to them, what iniquity have your fathers found in me? While God was going after them, while God was trying to build a relationship with them, they were turning away from God and turning to idols. Meanwhile, they didn't know the implication of what they were doing. He says, they have gone far from me and have walked after vanity and have become what? Vain. New King James says they began to engage in idolatry and they became idolaters. He doesn't explain it as deep as I want. He says they walked after vanity. Do you remember the book of Acts? You would have read the story in the book of Acts chapter 14, where the Bible says that Paul and Barnabas, apostles Paul and Barnabas, went into a city. And then by the time they finished their preaching engagement, okay, let's read it. There's time, so we can read it. Acts chapter 14, beginning at verse 12. Acts chapter 14 and verse 12. Okay, go back to verse 10. Let's see if we can build the story. Acts chapter 14 and verse 10. Go to 7. Eight. And in Lystra, a certain man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had what? Never walked. Verse 9. Verse 9. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, what happened? Said with a loud voice, stand up straight on your feet. And he leaped and walked. What initiated this miracle? Paul saw that he had faith. He had faith. So on the basis of his faith, Paul was able to speak a word, and the man responded to that word by faith, and he leaped and walked. If you had the Warri City Crusade, you remember that on one of the days I began to say, if you can take a step, I dare you to stand up and walk. And the woman responded in faith. How many of you were there? And then she began to walk. We did a video with her testimony at the end, right? Because that is a response of faith to the word that has been spoken. So miracles can happen like that. Verse 11. Verse 11. Now, when the people saw what Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in Laocoonian, God bless you, language, the gods have come down to us, how? In the likeness of men. Verse 12. And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was what? The chief speaker. 13. Then the priest of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with who? The multitudes. 14. But when the apostles, Barnabas, I told you Barnabas is an apostle. When the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard this, what did they do? Tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, men, why are you doing these things? We also are men with the same nature as you. Now notice, what was the center of their message? And preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all things that are where? What are the useless things he's talking about? Idols. Give me King James. Give me King James, this verse, King James. He says, and preach unto you that ye should turn from what? These vanities unto who? The living God. Who is this living God? The maker of heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein. So part of what preaching should do, part of what preaching, good preaching should do, part of what it should do is that it should turn your heart from what? Vanities. But you know that sometimes there is preaching that creates idols in the hearts of men. That even some of the things that we call preaching today, the objective of that preaching is not to make God the center of the man's life, but to make the man the center of his own life. So men are coming to God looking for God to do something for them that will provide them comfort in this life. Some are coming to God on the basis of their greed. Some are coming to God so that they can use God for their own self-gratification and their own self-indulgence. So, what the preacher does is that he hypes the man and elevates the man to such a status that the man thinks that he himself is a God unto himself and he needs to satisfy and worship himself. Accurate preaching and teaching of the scriptures should turn the hearts of men from vanities. And this is why that second point we discussed is very, very critical. Doctrine. I didn't have the time I was not led at that time to show you the three sources of doctrine. But you can do your study. Doctrines can come from men. Doctrines can come from demons. Doctrines can come from God. Doctrine. You can go and study, you will find it. So Paul and Barnabas, seeing that because of the miracle that they had performed, people were about to make idols out of them. What did they do? They tore their clothes. And say, how come we have been preaching to you that you should turn your heart from vanities, and you are trying to make us another vanity that you want to pursue? The priest of Zeus gathered the multitude and said, oh boy, the gods have come to us in the likeness of men. Let's go and sacrifice. But Paul and Barnabas cried out. You know why? Any man that has truly made contact with the living God will know that God hates idolatry. Any man. God hates idolatry so much that he can kill that thing to set you free. He can kill it. He knows that you have put your heart, you have made something or someone your idol. He will kill that thing to set you free. And that is not wickedness, it's an act of mercy. It's an act of mercy to set you free, so that that idol will leave your heart. God was not bloodthirsty. He didn't want Isaac's blood. Are you aware? He told Israel that they must not engage in human sacrifice. Have you read it in Deuteronomy and Exodus? How will he tell them not to engage in human sacrifice and then demand blood sacrifice, human blood sacrifice from Abraham? He never had intention to kill Isaac. He wanted to remove Isaac from Abraham's heart. So this is why when he gave Abraham that instruction, he was specific. Take thy only son whom thou what? Lovest. Have you seen women that waited on God for a long time to have a child? They can pamper the child into immorality. It's not all, some. They can pamper the child out of God. That child can become an idol because they have waited for so long. Isaac became an idol. We don't have the details. But you know what God does with idols? You must take them to the mountain and put them on the altar. If it doesn't die, it will not allow you to live. If the idol doesn't die, you will not live. Because every time God looks at you, he will keep seeing something that you have elevated above him in your walk with him. And such an individual, if God attempts to bring you behind the veil with an idol in your heart, everything, every resource that God gives to you, spiritual, physical, material, financial, it will come from God, but you will use it to service the idol. So he can't bring you behind the veil with an idol in your heart. Those that go behind the veil must be those who love the Lord thy God, their God, with all their heart, all their soul, and all their minds. So when Paul and Barnabas saw it, they said, never, we will not be part of this. They tore their clothes. Some preachers need to tear their clothes. Because some people have elevated their pastors above Jesus. Above Jesus. So people will not. Have you tried to discuss Bible with this generation in recent times? It's clear in the Bible that if any man desires the office of a bishop, he has to be a man of how many wives? I want you to say it. One wife. One. Of Ovo. One wife. He must not be a brawler. He must not be given to wine. It's in the Bible. He must know how to manage his house in fear of the Lord. If any man wants to be a leader. Part of leadership is that he must also know that he is not the chief shepherd. The people are not his own. They belong to Jesus. He cannot seek honor from them except the one that God chooses that they should come, that will come from their hearts normally. Because you are required to honor those who labor over you in what? In word and doctrine. The Bible says that those kind of people are worthy of what? Double honor. But that doesn't mean that the person should become God. to them. That the person is now elevated above the living God in the people's lives. That's not how it works. They said, the gods have come to us in the form of men. And Paul and Barnabas said, God forbid, this kind of offering is not for mortals. Do you know it would have been possible for them to say, what are you doing now? Don't do that, oh. You are killing a cow. Barnabas, see this guy, so you are killing a cow. Don't do that, oh. And people said, no, sir, we just want to honor you. Then 92-year-olds are kneeling down for you and say, I celebrate your grace. And then you that is 90 years old, because you started seeing some revelation, you say, oh man, dovezones. He says, grace is grace. He says, no, did I tell them to kneel down for God's sake? I don't have control over what people do to me, for God's sake. I just came out of my car and everybody was kneeling down. They tore their clothes. So just in case the people thought they were joking, you didn't read it all. They ran in their midst. Stop it, stop it. They were running. They know that God hates idolatry. Idolatry. The reason I brought you here was to show you that good preaching, accurate kingdom teaching, is supposed to turn your heart away from what? Vanities. Let's go back. I think we're in verse 5. Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 5. That's where we are. Jeremiah chapter 2 and verse 5. He says, what iniquity have your fathers found in me? Because the only argument for you to turn your heart away from God is that you must have seen something in God that you have found unfavorable, that has made you to turn your back on him and begin to seek succor, comfort, direction, and government elsewhere. If such has not happened in your heart, you will not seek alternatives.